Okay, this video's a closer look at fighters. And I've got to admit, I was a bit sort of wary of fighters when I started seeing them being used. I was thinking, oh my god, there's potentially a huge amount of paperwork and admin connected with this, but there isn't. Fighters, I've already mentioned before, they're on the counters, and you'll see them in the middle left of a counter. Example of this is this Hydron cruiser here, which has a capacity of 3 fighters on board. Now, fighters are also integral parts of carriers and carrier groups. You can see a carrier group, an escort carrier. Consists of the carrier itself and its escort. So it's an escort carrier with an escort, and you can see it has an intrinsic set of fighters of 3. Now, fighters they've got a defense factor of 1 and an attack factor of 1, and they can be used to satisfy combat losses. Now, the canniest people amongst you will have thought, well, groups like the Hydrons, who have intrinsic fighters on board virtually all their ships, and effectively in the first round of combat they could just expend all their fighters, and if they didn't have a second round of combat they could just retreat away. And people will say, oh yeah, but they've lost the fighters. But it don't work like that. What happens with fighters is after combat, in the retrograde movement phase, all carriers automatically receive replacement fighters up to their full capacity. Yeah, so you can obviously like exchange fighters for territory, but ultimately that's not going to do you a lot of good if you lose your territory, you'll eventually lose your bases and your planets and your star bases and your homeworld. So they can certainly slow people up if you wanted to use them as some form of attrition. Another thing to remember, not everybody has tons of fighters. Certainly the Hydrons have the most. I don't think the Lyrans have many fighters, but I'd have to check that out. Other units that carry fighters are star bases, battle stations, etc. Planetary defense units can have fighters. Now, fighters in the battle force, as I've said, can be used in the to satisfy combat losses, but you can also move fighters from the reserves into the battle force to restock the fighter component if you want to. Another thing is when your carriers get damaged or crippled, you don't lose your fighters. So long as you've got somewhere to send those fighters, you can use them. You can rebase them on other carriers or bases with sufficient fighter capacity. So you're only really taking a track of where your fighters are during an actual combat. So there's no paperwork after the combat, but you've got to be aware that you can fighters can be moved around during a battle. Another thing to remember is reaction movement. Fighters can react away from their carriers, so they could form like a screen to create a battle hex there. So if I had a carrier with 6 fighters on it, I could send those fighters out and use them to slow down an incoming enemy fleet attack. Another thing I've mentioned that you can use fighters from the reserve to restock your carriers, etc. and your bases in the actual battle, but you can also use fighters on ships in the reserve. Each 6 fighters from the reserve counts as 1 ship towards your combat command ratio. So if you've got a command score of 10, you could have 9 ships in the battle formation, and you could use 6 fighters from the reserve to make up that extra ship. The only time fighters aren't replenished is if you're out of supply, effectively isolated during the retrograde movement phase. You can produce fighters during your production phase if you've got any sort of carriers or bases or anything that are short of fighters. You can actually produce them then. Another thing to remember is a lot of nations, they have a construction schedule, but you also have a default group of things that you can build. Like it could be 1 fleet repair dock. For example, the Klingons, they are able to produce 6 fighters per turn. It's just part of their economic base in terms of building things. So those units wouldn't have to be overbuilt. You can build them for their actual true cost. That's 1 point per fighter. Another thing to remember is when carriers are newly built, they come with a full component of fighters. So you don't have to stock them up with fighters, they're already there. Now remember, when you're building carriers, they're very expensive. You rarely see them in your schedule, and often they're going to have to be built by overbuilds or by a sort of maybe substitutions or even conversions. And a step of carrier costs 2 economic points to produce. When I say step, I mean a combat point worth of carriers costs 2 economic points to produce, and that's because of its intrinsic fighter capacity. You're basically saying, I'm supplying fighters for the lifetime of the carrier. As we've already said, you can replace all your fighters in the retrograde movement step and even in your production step. But if you do that, I think they are free. Yeah, it says here in 50155 they're free unless drawn from a partial supply grid. So I may have said earlier that the fighters, like the 6 Klingon fighters that you can build every turn anyway, cost 1 point. I think you'll find because they would be replacements, they would cost nothing, but I'd have to double check that.